Welcome to Constitution Study Television, and my name is Douglas V. Gibbs. I am your host, and we are ready for the beginning of Lesson 2, which is legislative powers, and Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. I use the one that you get from the National Center for Constitution Studies, so you can nccs.net if you would like to buy them. Otherwise, if you have your own constitution and you know how to work your way through it, that's fine. We're on Article 1, Section 1. Article 1, Section 1. So if you're following along, pull out your Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. And here's how it reads. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. Now, let's break down the language word by word. All. All means all. All means everything. It doesn't mean mostly. It doesn't mean kind of should have or whatever. All means all. All legislative powers. What are legislative powers? Legislative powers are the ability to make law, modify law, and repeal law. All legislative powers create law, modify law, repeal, or strike down law. All legislative powers herein. Herein is a very interesting word. One time I was speaking to a group and I asked them what herein means, and a 10-year-old in the front row raised his hand and said herein. And that's exactly right. So all legislative powers herein, granted. Granted means to legally transfer. And if the legislative powers are being legally transferred, that means there's a transferor and a transferee. In this case, the delegates represented the states, and they were transferring some of the power from the states to the federal government. Before the Constitution, the states held all legislative powers. They were giving legislative powers that had to do with federal authorities to the federal government. Not all legislative powers, but all legislative powers herein granted, the ones granted by the Constitution, limited to only those authorities. So they were granted from the state to the federal government. The states are the parents. They're the ones that created this Frankenstein monster we call the federal government. So all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested. Shall. That's very definitive. It doesn't mean kind of coulda, woulda. It is shall. Either it is or it isn't. It shall be. So all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested. Vested is a key word here. Like granted, it means a transfer of power. Like vested, it means powers given to, but there's another definition, part of the definition that's very important. Vested also means not only that it's a granting of power, but that those powers are irrevocable. In other words, the legislature cannot give them away. They belong only to the legislature forever, or at least as long as this contract is in place. Interestingly enough, if you read your state constitution, it says the same thing. That the powers, the legislative powers given to the legislatures are vested in those legislatures. So vested is the key word. It means transfer of power and irrevocable. They cannot be given away. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Congress consisting of two houses, the Senate and the House, and we'll get into that in future episodes. Now, all legislative powers granted shall be vested in a Congress. What that means is anytime you see the president, the executive comes from the word execute, it's his job to execute the laws. A president cannot give an executive order, executive action, or something like that. It creates, modifies, or repeals the law, because all legislative powers belong to only Congress. When President Obama used executive orders to change dates and modify Obamacare, which he did over 45 times, that was all unconstitutional. If you're going to have an executive order, it has to be the execution of an existing law. For example, when President Trump called his executive order for the restriction of persons from certain countries to be able to come into this country, it was the execution of an immigration law that was already on the books. That said, that the president may restrict from certain countries. Also, immigration law requires certain procedures to be in place. So through the Border Patrol, the president is executing those laws. At the state level, the governor is the executive. And the language used in the state constitution is very similar. So, for example, with the COVID-19 situation, and you have governors that are dictating, giving orders, and everybody's treating it as if it has the power of law. It does not. An executive order is either a proclamation or it is instructions to the people in the executive branch on how to carry out the execution of a law. Regulatory agencies are there to ensure that the proper execution is in place, not to create, change, modify, or repeal. Anytime that you have a judge strike down a law and say it's no longer valid because we said so, because we say it's unconstitutional or something, by striking it down, they have repealed that law, and that is a legislative action. Constitutionally, they cannot do that. While a judge can have an opinion, a judicial opinion that the law is unconstitutional, the actual striking down or repealing or changing or modifying of the law must be done legislatively to be constitutional. When you have judges doing such things, that's what they call legislating from the bench. So Article 1, Section 1 really sets things up, separation of powers. The legislative branch has legislative powers, the executive branch has executive powers, the judicial branch has judiciary powers or judicial powers. And those powers are to be only to belong to those branches. The states have local powers based on what's not given to the federal government. The federal government has federal powers. So there's also a separation of powers there. It's all very simple and laid out nicely. So Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. All, every last one of them, legislative powers, power to create, modify, and strike down laws, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested, irrevocable. The Congress cannot say, you know what, we're taking a break, we're going to let the president make law for a couple months. No, they can't do that. They cannot give away their legislative powers, just like the state legislature, because the word vested is also used in state constitutions, cannot give away their legislative powers. They cannot say, you know, we're going to let the governor call the shots on this one. If there's no legislative power behind it, then an action by a governor or president has no legal teeth. No legal authority. It cannot be a law. In California, for example, recently, Governor Newsom has mandated that everyone has to wear a mask in public. No, it's a recommendation because his order cannot be a law, cannot carry the force of law unless there's legislative accompaniment, and there is not. So he's overstepping his constitutional authority. So all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of two houses, the House and the Senate. That is the beginning of Lesson 2. We will continue with the next video. We'll get into the 3/5 clause. Until then, be safe. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, and God bless you. Where we stand, where we go one, we go all. PoliticalPistachio.com, DouglasVGibbs.com. Donate if you can. This stuff costs funds, and we really need funds, especially since I have not been doing any speaking engagements during this unconstitutional scamdemic. So donations are badly needed. If you need, have any questions or you want to make any suggestions, constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com. And once again, visit my websites at politicalpistachio.com and douglasvgibbs.com. We'll be back soon with the next video in this series. Thanks for watching.